Welcome, everyone. My name is Alicia Jackson, and I'm the Instructional Design Specialist with ASFPM. We're excited to welcome you to the National Policy Briefing for January 2026. Before we begin, just a few quick administrative items. These are monthly high-level briefings and will take about 30 minutes of your time. Today's session is being recorded. If you'd like to reference it later, the recording will be available in about 1 week, if not sooner. You should see a Q&A feature in Zoom, typically near the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit your questions there, and we'll address as many as we can at the end, time permitting. And lastly, a quick note that this briefing is not eligible for CECs. Today's agenda includes the following topics: NFIP Cliff, Congressional Minibus and Appropriations Conference Report, NCAR Alert and Status, FEMA Review Council, SBA Interim Final Rule, and a Q&A. Kicking us off today is Chad Berginnis, the ASFPM Executive Director, here to discuss the NFIP Cliff. Chad, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Alicia, and welcome everybody to our monthly policy call. And this month there is a lot of new and late-breaking information. And in fact, because the NFIP cliff, we just thought we'd give a better way of saying, its potential lapse on Saturday. It is now very much tied up in the congressional minibus and appropriations. And so, Alicia, if it's okay, I will go ahead and let Elizabeth talk about that as she talks about the second item. Thank you.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, then I will make your introduction. We're going to hear from you. Elizabeth is the ASFPM Washington Liaison, and she'll also be speaking with David Conrad, the ASFPM Water Resource Policy Specialist, who will brief us on the Congressional Minibus and Appropriations Conference Report as well. Go ahead, Elizabeth, when you're ready.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. Hi, everyone. Well, I'm going to provide a real quick update and insights into where we are with the fiscal 26 appropriations bill and the pending minibus. So to level set, we're currently operating the federal government under a continuing resolution that expires at 11:59 p.m. tomorrow. Congress has passed 6 of the 12 required spending bills for FY26, 3 when they ended the shutdown last November. So Ag, Legislative Branch, and Military Construction were passed in November. And then 3 earlier this month, Commerce, Justice, and Science, Environment and Interior, and Energy and Water. And the last 6 bills were bundled into a minibus that included Department of Defense, Labor, HHS, Transportation, Housing, Urban Development, State Department and Foreign Ops, Financial Services, and Department of Homeland Security, which has the FEMA funding in it. So not without drama, the House did manage to pass the minibus and send it over to the Senate, and then they promptly left town for recess last Friday. It was believed that although the compiled 6 appropriations bills didn't make everybody happy, it was nevertheless enough of a bipartisan and bicameral meeting of the minds to believe that the Senate, who was coming back from their own recess this week, would be able to muscle through this 6-bill minibus and avoid a government shutdown on January 31st. But then external events threw the mother of all monkey wrenches into Congress's best laid plans. The tragic events in Minnesota have thrown into spotlight Department of Homeland Security and its immigration and custom enforcement activities, and have called into question the viability of the FY26 funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Without further updates and guardrails to DHS ICE procedures and directives, it appears that we've reached an impasse. Today, the initial vote in the Senate to advance the 6-bill minibus failed to get the requisite 60 votes needed to proceed to the Senate floor. It's unlikely that Senior Majority Leader Thune will try for a second procedural vote on this particular package of bills, as he doesn't have to support 7 Republicans deferred from their party and joined their Democrats in voting against this appropriations minibus. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and the other Democrat leaderships have been speaking with the White House, and although President Trump has made some leadership and staff changes at DHS, Democrats still want codified changes into the FY26 funding bill to address their concerns, not executive orders, not a promise of future legislation. So the most likely next steps in the Senate today and into tomorrow will be to break the DHS bill from the 6-bill minibus, seek passage of that remaining 5 bills, which would fund about 98% of the federal government in total, with the 11 out of 12 bills being passed with that. They would have to add a short-term continuing resolution to allow time for Congress to address the changes in the Department of Homeland Security bill. But because that changes the content of the original package that was passed by the House last week, it will have to go back to them for consideration and passage. The House would also have to consider, vote on, and pass the continuing resolution as well. With the House on recess and not returning until next week, the government will shut down at 12:01 a.m. on Saturday, January 31st. The NFIP will lapse at that time as well. And failing to pass the DHS spending bill also impacts FEMA's ability to approve and disperse disaster funds that were agreed to in the bill. And it postpones the enactment of directive language that prevents the administration from freezing or terminating disaster grants and reimbursements. We don't have any indication about how long this shutdown will last, but even on the smoothest of timelines, the House would need a couple days to review, debate, and then pass the modified 5-bill spending package and the continuing resolution. As of 2 p.m. today, we don't even have language for the continuing resolution to review, but we expect that it will contain a 1 to 2 week extension on the Department of Homeland Security spending bill. And then there are other headaches in the House as well. GOP leadership is going to need to negotiate with Democrats to get passage of both the minibus and the continuing resolution. Hardline Republicans will oppose separating these bills, breaking off the DHS bill, and they'll also more than likely oppose the continuing resolution. Further, Democratic support on the continuing resolution is not a given either. Majority Leader Jeffries said this morning that the Senate passed continuing resolution language, when it does finally arrive in the House, would have to contain very specific interim restrictions on DHS's continuing operation in order for him to signal to his fellow House Democrats that they could support the bill. Speaker Johnson has reiterated that it'll be very difficult for him to get the whole House back this weekend. Republican leadership is planning on holding a conference call, I think in the next hour or so, to discuss further options. But with the thin majority that the Republicans have in the House, Speaker Johnson needs every member back in chamber in order to proceed. And we have another storm threatening the East Coast, which could impact people coming back this weekend. And more importantly, several Republican members are on congressional delegation visits to foreign nations, and it's unlikely that they would be able to return to Washington, D.C. prior to Monday's anticipated expected return. So it looks like we're going to be heading into a government shutdown for at least the weekend and into the first couple days of next week. Things are very fluid and changing by the hour. So we'll continue to monitor the situation and update you once we know more. And with that, I'll turn it over to David to talk about the Appropriations Conference report.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for getting us oriented on the daily machinations on the big picture of appropriations. Of special interest, I'm sure, to ASFPM members, however, are the so far agreed upon House and Senate Homeland Security bills funding and prodigious reporting provisions for FEMA in 2026. So that would be for the rest of this year through September 30th. First and overall, there are a number of positive signs in this legislation that the Homeland Security Committees are allocating more funding in key FEMA programs, including NFIP, which would seem to signal that the congressional Republicans are disinclined to follow without question the White House lead in abolishing FEMA as we know it, and at least in FY 2026. Overall, Congress would increase FEMA's total budget by $4.7 billion above last year's $32 billion, and includes $26.4 billion for the Disaster Relief Fund, basically similar to fiscal year 25's funding and President Trump's FY 26 budget. In the statement of managers on the bill, which is essentially what most people know of as a conference report, it says quote, FEMA shall maintain staffing levels, including a reservist workforce and its cadre of response and recovery employees, which you generally know of as CORE, necessary to fulfill the missions required under the Homeland Security Act. It also states relating to the FEMA Review Council that FEMA shall not, the quote again, shall not implement an elimination or reorganization plan for the agency or any proposal to inhibit the performance or the agency's functions and activities funded by this act without an act of Congress permitting such measures. So that doesn't, neither of those two quotes would be statute, but it is fairly strong statements of congressional concern and interest that is usually not ignored by the executive branch. I'll leave it at that. It demands answers and ongoing reports to the appropriations committees on status of hazard mitigation grants and the status of BRIC grants, the specific rationale used to cancel BRIC grants and their effects, and the rationale used for disaster declarations and denials in the past year. It requests a National Academies study of how renters and rental markets have recovered from recent disasters with focus on long-term displacement times. It directs a specified budget for EMAC in 2027, and it requires a timeline for appointing members of the FEMA National Advisory Committee and the Technical Mapping Advisory Council, TMAC, and that FEMA maintains staffing levels, including Corps and reservist workforce, necessary to fulfill its statutory responsibilities, as well as monthly committee briefings on staffing levels and workload requirements, and that would be in both the House and Senate. On funding, some high points are certain important accounts show increases that also indicate the Appropriations Committee's interest in and support for NFIP and FEMA Stafford Act programs. Flood hazard mapping and risk analysis program had enacted funding of $21.475 million in FY25. The final bill is $297 million and odd million, which is $15.6 million above last year's money. Regional catastrophic preparedness grants is up $800 million to $11.4 million. The flood mitigation assistance program gets $175 million. It had $600 million at the beginning of 2025, but which was budgeted, but then withdrawn, and there haven't since been NOFOs for that $600 million. So this is a positive upgrade. High hazard potential dams and high risk dam safety had zero money in 2025 and gets $11.4 million in this year. Next generation warning system was $340 million in FY25 and is up $8 million this year. Community project spending, which is direct member requests. They have a hearing every year in appropriations and open the door for member requests. That was zero in 2025 and is now $272 million in 26. The disaster relief fund was $22.5 million in last year, and this year in the final bill it's up $3.875 million. Regional operations was $210 million and is up $15 million in 26. These are all good examples that Congress appropriators are being supportive of FEMA and NFIP programs in the new appropriations. Increasing the funding of risk mapping is a good sign, as well as funding of dam safety and FEMA regional operations, and the indicated ongoing concern in the report concerning the BRIC program. It still remains to be seen whether Congress will have the heft to restore BRIC, even with an important court win by 20 state attorney generals. With that, I will pass this on to, I guess it's...
I can take it back, David.
Yeah, go ahead,
Thank you. Thanks,
Alicia.
David. Thanks, Elizabeth. For our next topic, NCAR Alert and Status, we're joined by Meg Galloway, ASFPM Senior Policy Advisor. Meg, go ahead. You might be on mute, Meg.
Yeah, no, sorry, I lost the cursor to unmute. So, yeah, I'm here to talk today about the status of the National Center for Atmospheric Research, or NCAR. It's a federally funded research and development center headquartered in Boulder, Colorado. It is sponsored by the National Science Foundation. NCAR's laboratories focus on topics within Earth system science, such as climate science, meteorology, and social impacts of weather and climate. Wonder why it's being attacked. It provides the science community with specialized instrumentation, research, aircraft, supercomputers, atmospheric models, and data sets for conducting research. NCAR is one of the National Science Foundation's federally funded research and development centers, with approximately 95% of its funding coming from the federal government. However, it is not a federal agency, and its employees are not federal employees. On December 16th, the Office of Management and Budget Director Russ Vogt announced the plan to close NCAR, alleging climate alarmism as the reason. In response, ASF put out a member alert on this effort to fund NCAR, urging members to contact their senators immediately to express support and sustain federal investment in science that underpins the floodplain management. This effort to dismantle NCAR is still actively proceeding through administrative restructuring, despite congressional rejection of deep funding cuts to the National Science Foundation. Congress recently passed a spending bill that avoided direct and immediate funding of NCAR. However, the administration is moving forward with plans to break up the institution, citing it as a source of climate alarmism. To that end, National Science Foundation has formally requested input on plans to restructure NCAR, which includes proposals to divest, transfer, or move its critical capabilities, such as supercomputing and research aircraft. While NCAR may not be entirely defunded in one swoop, it is at risk of being broken into smaller and less effective parts. Unfortunately, efforts by Colorado senators to include language in the January 26 spending bill that would have explicitly protected NCAR from being dismantled failed. Although the 26 budget was largely passed at its current level, the administration's ongoing efforts to target NCAR mean that the institution remains highly vulnerable to funding cuts in the upcoming 27 federal budget. Now is the time to continue our grassroots effort to save NCAR. The National Science Foundation has just announced it's accepting public feedback on the restructuring of National Science Foundation and NCAR until March 13th. To comment regarding the restructuring of NCAR, you can submit written input by March 13th, 2026. The input should address specific questions on NCAR's future, such as potential duplication of services, management alternatives, performance metrics. The submissions are limited to 2 to 3 pages per topic. Again, the submission deadline is March 13th. As far as formatting, they should be concise. It took a while to figure out where to submit them, but to provide comments on NCAR, use their contact form, which is https://ncars.ucar.edu/contact. I will put this in the chat so that people have it. And I think that's it. So I will pass it back to you, Alicia.
Thank you very much, Meg. For our final two topics today, focused on the FEMA Review Council and the SBA interim final rule, we will hear from Chad Berginnis, ASFPM's Executive Director. Go ahead, Chad.
All right. Hello again. And before I address those topics, David Conrad, if you wouldn't mind taking a look at the Q&A, both the answered and the open questions.
Okay, sure.
Because I believe there's some things in the conference report that are germane to the questions. And Alicia, hopefully we can have time to discuss those questions at the end.
Sure.
So I'll try to be brief. The FEMA Review Council. So December came and went, and in December, there was supposed to be a Review Council meeting to share the results of the Review Council's report, at least their preliminary findings. Just hours before the meeting was to happen, it was canceled. And up until this past weekend, we really did not have any visibility on what the Review Council was going to do, if they were going to reschedule things, if the report would ever see the light of day. And then we had on January 23rd, the president issued another executive order to continue the Emergency Management Review Council until March 25th, 2026. And so essentially it gives the Review Council another 2-month extension that way. Now there's a lot of speculation, I think, in terms of, why extend it? Probably there does seem to be some logic that perhaps there will be some sort of report coming out to see the light of day. In the meantime, there's been actually some interesting reporting. It does appear that some media outlets must have a draft copy of the report. And one of the things that we saw in an article earlier this week actually were a couple positive recommendations that seem to be in the draft report concerning the NFIP. And one of those was a recommendation to forgive the debt in the program. And the debt in the NFIP is a albatross around the program's neck, whereby right now over $700 million a year in program funds are going to simply pay the interest on that debt. The opportunity cost being money that could have been used for mapping, for claims, for mitigation, is going to pay the interest on the debt. And this is legacy debt as well. The other thing is that there appears to be some sort of recommendation supporting giving more resources and expanding flood mapping. And again, we see this as positive. I think at the time, back in the November-December timeframe, we had heard some rather disturbing elements of that report concerning the NFIP and some partial privatization and those kinds of things. So we will keep tabs on that issue and report out to folks as we find out more information. So the last topic I want to talk to is something that has been developing over the last 36 hours or so. And later today or tomorrow, hopefully it'll be later today, we're actually going to be getting a member alert out. And that is on today's publication of a Small Business Administration interim final rule. And this rule comes on the heels of an executive order that was focused really on the LA wildfire recovery. But the interim final rule has nationwide applicability And it essentially allows the federal government to preempt state and local requirements that delay disaster recovery projects funded by the SBA Disaster Loan Program. And both the executive order and the interim final rule fly in the face of the administration's stated goal to shift more disaster responsibility to states. But in a nutshell, and folks, this is important, the interim final rule would allow for federal preemption of any state or local requirement causing an SBA loan recipient more than a 60-day delay in disaster recovery. It would deem that the preemption sufficient authorization for that person, that applicant, or that recipient to proceed with disaster-related reconstruction activities of the loan of that loan recipient without needing to obtain or comply with the preempted state or local requirement. So basically, no need to get permits, it sounds like. And then finally, it would prohibit state and local government enforcement of stop work orders, penalties, or enforcement action against the SBA disaster loan recipient or contractor or subcontractor representing the recipient. The announcement does state that the interim final rule does not preempt any substantive state and local building requirements like building standards, health and safety requirements, inspections, or certificates of occupancy, and basically only applies where state or local permits or other approvals stand as obstacles to accomplishing the federal goal of rapid relief. But when you look at the rule and the construction, what you have to try to kind of understand is, okay, what is then being preempted? It doesn't say anything specific about floodplain management requirements. However, almost universally, floodplain management requirements are tied to public health and safety, and so they should be okay. But the things that might fall under this would be local zoning requirements, state or local environmental regulations, and other kinds of standards that way. And so this is essentially what the administration, I think, is trying to do, is trying to test and expand federal powers in a way that affects our little corner of the universe. It literally, I think, is going to end up being a fight between the supremacy clause of the Constitution and the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. So in terms of action for members, because what was so crazy about this thing is it is effective today. So what is it then from the standpoint of communities we're dealing with? We would recommend that your community or state legal counsel be made aware of this rule. Forward the actual rule to them. Make sure the attorneys general or your local legal counsel does it, because what I think I worry about is if I'm a disaster loan applicant and somehow I see this rule, am I going to walk into a local permit office and basically say, nope, don't need to get a permit, don't need to comply, and go on my merry way in doing things? So the second thing would be to have a plan for dealing with SBA loan recipients should they proceed in this manner. We have very significant concerns about this rule's ability to withstand legal challenges, and I have fair degree of confidence that it will be in court very, very quickly. However, that doesn't negate the fact that you could have somebody locally try to use this. And then finally, submit comments to the Federal Register. While the rule is now in effect, it says that there is a comment period until March 2nd, 2026. And again, we will have the link to it in the member alert that is coming out. Finally, the executive order calls both on FEMA and SBA to publish proposed regulations or legislation within 30 days, and then or legislation in 30 days and final regulations in 90 days. So I've heard, at least through a source, that FEMA is also working on this. We have no idea what the scope of the programs are going to be. But again, for any of you that have been in land use regulations or those kinds of things, you know that a pretty agreed upon idea of federalism is that that land use regulation is reserved for states and communities. And this just tramples on, I think, state and local authorities and their ability to dictate the future of their own community. So, so we wanted to make folks aware of it. We have also an outstanding request to the SBA with a number of questions on how this thing is actually going to be, how this thing is going to be administered. Is there an appeals process? We have lots and lots of questions. And so we'll continue to keep members informed of this evolving situation, but wanted to make folks aware that, hey, this is not just about the LA wildfire recovery. This is something much, much bigger. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Alicia. Thank you.
Thanks, Chad. We'll now take a few questions submitted through the Zoom Q&A section. The first question is, while there are increases shown in mapping budgets for FY26 over FY25, is there any mechanism to ensure the NOFOs are issued for the states to have access to the funds?
David,
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to get that on that. The one thing that I saw overall the conference report, and I'm trying to think, David, if there was anything related to mapping NOFOs, but Congress is very clearly wanting to do more oversight, and the conference report has many instances where they are asking FEMA within X amount of days to report on the status of this program or that program or that program. David, what I can't remember is was there anything specific to either the mapping program or NOFOs in FY26?
Well, there is, and on both. The appropriations committees are asking essentially for almost monthly reports, and on those subjects and others. On the NOFOs, they really zeroed in on oh gosh. Brick money. They wanted anything that any response requests that came in from the NOFOs. They want to know what the status of that is. So the answer is a yes. There's plenty there. I was just trying to pull up the conference report itself and give everybody a link to that, because it's worth reading for just about any subject in NFIP that you're interested in. And as Chad said, I can't but read that report as an intent on the part of the appropriations committees. And we've had some meetings recently with some of the authorizing committee folks. I think they are very interested in what has been going on. I think everybody who's been dealing with FEMA lately knows that the FEMA staff is absolutely intimidated about talking publicly or even privately about their jobs and what they're doing. And therefore, it's been radio silence much of the time. And I think we are hearing that even the Hill feels that way quite a bit too. So yes, let me get that conference report up there. If we've got a minute, and we've only got a minute, I can see. Anything else?
Thanks, David. That is the only other open question in our Q&A section, so that will bring us to the end of our 30-minute briefing today. Thank you all so much for attending. We appreciate your engagement and ongoing interest in national floodplain policy updates. Please mark your calendars and join us again on Thursday, February 26th for our next policy briefing. We look forward to seeing you then. Bye, everyone.
Alicia,
Yep. Yes.
Can you leave the chat open for about 2 minutes?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thanks.